Hey, welcome to the video. It's Thursday, August 19th, and we have a split slate day over on DraftKings. We have a 6-game early slate and a 4-game main slate, and yes, we'll be breaking down both in today's video. And both slates actually look pretty solid. We have lots of good pitching options, once again, similar to yesterday, and we have quite a few good stacks to talk about, so it should be a fun one. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already, and if you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. There's a couple hundred people over there. I'd be more than happy to have you. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the price that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on PrizePicks, you can use code CPENNY, get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the pitchers, then move on to the bats. And we'll start with the early slate guys here. And I only have 2 listed, and they are both quite expensive, so I realize we're getting a bit pricey with the pitching, $20,000 to be exact, but I was playing out some dummy lineups, put out the optimizer. I could make things work. I could still get some good bats in from Tampa, just as an example, and still fit in some other decent pieces, just from cheap offenses as one-offs or mini stacks and things like that. But we'll start with Zach Wheeler, $10,200. He draws a fantastic spot versus Arizona, who has really struggled versus right-handed pitching this season. A 3.67 implied team total against them. Pretty heavy favorite, 7.5 K prop over in Vegas. And if we're looking at his numbers on the season, they have been absolutely fantastic. One of the best pitchers in all of baseball. A good ERA, good xFIP, good SIERA, about a 30% K rate. The thing I love the most about him, though, he always limits the power and hard contact. Less than a 100 ISO given up on the season. A 23% hard contact rate and less than a homer allowed per 9. And like I was saying earlier, Arizona really does struggle versus right-handed pitching, where they only have a 134 team ISO, an 80 WRC plus, and striking out around 24.5% of the time. They do walk quite a bit, but I think Zach Wheeler, a guy that does limit those, would just fine in this matchup. And raw points wise, he's definitely the best pitcher on the early slate in my opinion. Then Shane McClanahan, $9,800. He could be your SP1 or I guess your SP2, at least in my case, because I am planning on spending up for both of these pitchers today, but only a 3.1 implied team total against them, which as of right now is the lowest on the slate. Nothing came out for Walker Buehler yet or Castillo, but there's a chance that it could be lower for the Mets and the Marlins, I guess, because, you know, 2 pretty bad offenses. But at least as the early slate goes, this is the lowest on that side. He's a very heavy favorite, 76% chance for a win. 6.5 K prop. He's pitching in one of the best pitchers parks in all of baseball at home in the Trop. And if we're looking at his numbers on the season, they've actually been pretty darn good. The ERA's around 3 3/4, but xFIP's down at 3 1/4. SIERA on 3.5, about a 28% K rate. He limits the power, has a lean to the ground balls. Baltimore is a better team versus left-handed pitching, but since they're on the road here in Tampa, I think McClanahan with his upside is going to be a very solid option here. And my projections are jamming both of these guys in all my lineups, and I'm still getting some decent bets, so I'm probably just going to roll with it on the early slate. I feel like it's the safest way to go, because there's some other cheap pitchers you could look at, but I'm having a hard time trusting them, so I'm just going to lock in the safety of these pitchers, and then just find some value bets to make it work. And then moving on to the late slate guys, we have Walker Buehler at $10,600, and he's a guy I have a lot of interest in. He gets a good spot here versus the Mets at home in LA. If I had to guess the team total for New York, I would probably guess like low 3s, probably similar to what the Orioles have versus McClanahan. It might be upper 2s. I might be a little bit pushing it there, but it's going to be pretty low in my opinion. Should be a pretty heavy favorite. The Dodgers offense is always going to make him, or pretty much any pitcher for the Dodgers, a pretty heavy favorite as good as it is. And if we're looking at his numbers in the season, they have been phenomenal. Like, he's had like a couple bad starts this year, but everything else has been awesome. Like 20 plus points almost every single start it feels like, but a very low ERA. The xFIP and SIERA are actually a lot higher, about a 1.5 higher, but I don't think that regression is going to come here versus the Mets. About a 27% carry, limits the power, gets a good amount of ground balls, limits the hard contact, limits the homers. I think if you had the money for Walker, he's a fantastic option on the late slate tonight. And then dropping down to some potential SP2s, or I guess SP1 depending on your roster construction. We have Brandon Woodruff at $9,200. He feels like he's been a bit hit or miss lately, but still, I mean, low team total here. It's a good spot versus St. Louis. They don't really strike out too much, but they do struggle with power versus right-handed pitching. They're definitely a lot better versus lefties. Only a 3.3 implied team total here. He's a pretty heavy favorite, 6.5 K prop. Looking at his numbers in the season, they have been awesome overall. Really low ERA. xFIP and SIERA about a run higher, but even then those numbers aren't too bad, around 3 and 3.3. About a 30% K rate. He limits the power, kind of similar to Zach Wheeler. Less than a 100 ISO given up. Gets a lean to the ground balls, only a 25% hard contact rate. and only 0.7 homers per 9. This price point, I think he's a very good option. If you can't quite get up to Walker Buehler, I mean, he's like $1,400 cheaper and has somewhat similar upside. So I do think Woodruff is obviously a great option. You can play them both together, or you could just pick and choose which one you like the most and kind of split them up in your lineups. But if I am playing cash games, I am probably going to try to get up to Walker Buehler tonight. Then Luis Castillo, $8,500, a pitcher that can be a bit hit or miss, but he gets a great spot here versus Miami. The only bad thing, he's pitching at home at Great American Small Park, so it's definitely one of the best places to hit in all of baseball. So those are your only concerns there. And sometimes when these pitchers are in fantastic spots, they don't always crush. Like yesterday, Tyler Mahle's facing us versus a Cubs team that's pretty much like a double-A squad. Well, he got crushed, gave up 5 runs. He somehow ended up positive points, like 5 points, but he was like a -10 or a -8 at one point. It was looking absolutely brutal. So, I mean, you got to be careful with pitchers these days, but it's a great spot versus Miami. They have like one good bat in Jazz, and that's really about it. Again, though, hate the park, but he's been decent later on as the season has progressed. I know he had a couple bad games recently, but I think $8,500 in a real soft spot versus Miami, a team that struggles versus either lefties or righties. And then if you need to go real cheap, we have Jameson Taillon at $6,300, and he's only on here because of the price point. Because I'm going to be honest, I do have interest in the Minnesota Twins, basically because they're dirt cheap. But Taillon, besides his last start, was having a real nice stretch of games where he was just putting up very, very solid fantasy outings. His numbers on the season aren't overly impressive, but you got to keep in mind he's only $6,300. Like, there's been instances where Taillon's like close to $9,000. Now at $6,300, it just feels a bit cheap in my opinion. A 4.26 Sierra, 4.6 xFIP again, which is pretty high. 23.5% K rate. High fly ball rate, gives up a lot of power. Like, the Twin stack is definitely viable today, but there's only a 4 implied team total against them. He's a 71% chance for a win and a 5.5 K prop over in Vegas. Like, I don't love Taillon tonight, but if he can get away with like 3 runs, he goes 5 or 6 innings, picks up the win, and has a handful of strikeouts. I mean, that's not bad at all at $6,300. And if you go that route, you could probably full-on stack the Yankees, full-on stack another team you like the LA Dodgers tonight. So he's there if you need some expensive stacks, but outside of that, don't think I'd target him in cash games. But with that being said, I think we can move on to the bets because that's just about it for the pitching. And the first stack I want to talk about is a team that has been absolutely raking versus the Baltimore Orioles, and I don't think that's going to change here versus Rory Lopez. He is a guy that really struggles with left-handed bats. He can kind of be tough on the righties, but I think everybody's in play here. But the preferred targets are going to be Brandon Lau and Austin Meadows, and then obviously some other lefties like Ji-Man Choi, Kevin Kiermaier, Joey Wendell, Wander Franco. I mean, all those guys are viable, but Brandon Lau, Austin Meadows preferably, but the entire lineup is in play here. These guys are quite expensive, and like I said, we're probably spending up for a pitcher, so we're probably not going to be able to afford like a full-on stack if you're playing like single entry. So if you want to full-on stack these guys, you might have to find a cheaper pitching option, or you're going to go real dirt cheap with a secondary stack or one-offs, which is certainly possible on this slate. I'm going to talk about another team I like quite a bit coming up that do have some really cheap options, but all these guys make plenty of sense to me. Rory Lopez is a guy that will struggle with the lefties. We have a team total close to 6 here. I realize the park sucks for hitting, but that has not stopped the Rays recently. They have been raking, and that's probably going to continue here versus Rory Lopez today. And then moving on to the Detroit Tigers here, I know their team total isn't super high, but they're just one of those cheaper stacks and cheaper one-off plays that I think you can make fit with some expensive pitching and an expensive stack like the Tampa Bay Rays tonight. And plus, my optimizer just keeps jamming in Detroit Tigers today, so I think we'll just roll with it. Some of these guys actually do have some decent splits versus lefty. They're facing on cue ball from LA, and if we're looking at these guys as splits versus lefties, Robbie Grossman's got over a 200 ISO with a 358 WOBA. Jonathan Scope over a 260 ISO with a 353 batting average. Miggy's batting over 300. The power hasn't been there, but he's also going for home run number 500. And I would not be surprised if it happens today. I don't know what it is. I have to double check this, but I feel like Miggy always has some solid games during the day. So we'll see how that goes. But I feel like the narrative, number 500 could be coming soon for Miguel. Candelario batting cleanup here at $3,900. I mean, his numbers are amazing in the power department, but he's got around a 300 batting average versus lefties. Renato Nunez, it's a very small sample size, so I won't even talk about it. But Eric Haas batting 313 with like 400 ISO and a 180 WRC plus versus lefties. Willie Castro, Victor Reyes, and Zach Shorter kind of just lineup fillers there. But the top half of that order, plus Eric Haas, I mean, does look pretty good today versus Quintana. I don't think Quintana is terrible, and I mean, Vegas doesn't think the Detroit Tigers are going to go off here. But if you're just looking for pricing plays, I think Detroit's a good way to go. And then the last stack I want to talk about from the early slate here, we have the Houston Astros on the road versus KC versus Mike Minor, who I will say was almost tempted to put on the sheet here because of his price point below $6,000. Like, I know he's not great, but $5,700 was actually a little enticing there. So if you want to like full on stack the Rays today, you could try your luck with Mike Minor, but to be honest, I'd rather stack against him. He's the guy that gives up over a 200 ISO versus righties, some fly balls, some hard contact, and about 1.5 homers per 9. So Altuve, Carlos Correa, Yuli Gurriel, Diaz, McCormick, Myers, Maldonado, all those guys look playable to me. If you want to play the lefties in tournaments, that's fine with Michael Brantley and Yordan Alvarez. Alvarez is a guy that has shown that he can hit lefties just fine in the past. Michael Brantley, a guy that I don't love versus lefties, but at some point he'll see a righty anyway. But the righties do look pretty good, and this isn't an overly expensive stack once you start filling in some guys in the bottom of the order like Diaz, McCormick, and guys like that do have actually some pop versus left-handed pitching. And then moving on to the main slate here, we only have 4 games, so that's 8 total teams, and there's some decent pitching options, so we have very limited options to talk about. But we'll start with the New York Yankees. I imagine they're going to be the big chalk here. They have a team total of around 6.5, which is by far higher than anybody else on these. Like the Dodgers are on here, and they only have a team total of like 5.5. So the Yankees are definitely going to be very popular, and plus they're not overly expensive either. Like DJ LeMahieu leading off is only $4,300. Anthony Rizzo is going to be insanely chalky. He was 61% owned in cash games last night. On the main slate tonight, you're probably looking at like 70-80%. $3,700 versus a righty batting second for the Yankees with a team total of 6.5 versus John Gant. Yeah, you're going to play Anthony Rizzo in cash games. Aaron Judge can crush either lefties or righties. Joey Gallo, only $4,500. Batting cleanup, lefty and righty matchup. Love that a lot. Stanton's fine, but prefer him versus lefties. Odor, if you're looking for a cheap third baseman, he's only $3,000. He doesn't really do anything well besides hit versus righties for power, and even then it's not great, but I like the price point on a good scoring team tonight, or at least projected to. Gary Sanchez is fine, Tyler Wade, Brett Gardner kind of lineup fillers, but definitely the top half of that order quite a bit, and pretty much the entire lineup is playable. It's such a small slate, so I'm going to try to get as much exposure to the Yankees as possible because I definitely think this is the best spot. Then moving on to the next team here, we have the Milwaukee Brewers on the road in St. Louis facing off versus John Lester in a pretty bad St. Louis bullpen. I prefer the righties here, but everyone's in play. You're going to see some righties out of the bullpen anyway at some point, but guys like Willy Adames, Eduardo Escobar, Avisel Garcia, Lorenzo Cain, Manny Pena, I guess Urias as well. All these guys are in play, but you could certainly play Wong and Christian Yelich in tournaments. But Adames, he's hit for power versus lefties all season long. So is Eduardo Escobar. Garcia's fine versus them. There's a few expensive guys right in the 2 through 4 spots there, but everyone else is kind of affordable for the most part. But if you just use some value bets somewhere else, it shouldn't be too hard to stack up the Milwaukee Brewers. Lester's giving up over a 2.30 ISO versus righties this season, so definitely think this is a good spot for all the Brewers tonight. The next team I want to talk about is the Minnesota Twins on the road in Yankee Stadium versus Jameson Taillon. I know I talked about Jameson Taillon being viable on today's slate if you want to get some expensive stacks in, but the guy is not the best pitcher in baseball. He's hittable. He does struggle with power, especially versus lefties, so I mean, look at these price points for the Twins. Like Kepler leading off below 4K. He has plenty of power versus righties. Brent Rooker is only $2,400 batting second. Jorge Polanco, $3,200 batting third. Donaldson, plenty of power in his bat, batting fourth, $3,200. Arias is below 3K. Mitch Garver below 4K. Like these guys are absolutely dirt cheap, and some of these guys actually have some decent numbers. So I love the price points quite a bit. If you want to get some expensive pitching and get some expensive Yankees in your lineup today, you're going to have to dig down to some of these cheap Twins, and I actually don't think it's a terrible spot. I know their team total is low at only 401, but Taillon is definitely hittable. I know he's been decent recently, but I mean, at these price points, I definitely think they're worth a value stack tonight or just some cheap one-offs to make some things work up top today. I want to mention the Dodgers are playable. I just hate their price points, and if I like the Yankees, we're probably going to have a hard time getting to some Dodgers as well, because if we just look at their prices, like Turner's close to 6K, so is Muncy, so is Turner, Seager's above 5K, Will Smith's close to mid 5K range, and then the cheap guys are Pollock and Cody Bellinger, but they're in the mid 4K range, and even Chris Taylor, projected about 8th, is $5,000. Like, good luck stacking all these guys. You're going to have to use some cheap pitching. You'll definitely have to use Jameson Taillon. Like, they're viable. They're going to have a team total above 5, would be my assumption, but Taijuan Walker is not that terrible of a pitcher. I know he's got a little bit lucky this season, but the prices are insane. If you want to take a couple of these guys as one-offs, like Trey Turner, I know Max Muncy went double dong yesterday, Corey Seager left and ready matchup, but I mean, outside of that, I'll probably just pick and choose a couple of these guys as one-off lineups. So if you're building like 150, yeah, you're going to want to get some Dodger stack. It's a 4-game slate. If I'm building single entry lineups, I probably won't get to any Dodgers today, but maybe 1 or 2. That being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to become an official member over on Patreon, link is down below in the description for that. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. You can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you guys in the next video on Friday.